The young Kareth student couldn't hide his disbelief as he stared at the human professor before him. The alien's 6 eyes blinked rapidly, a physiological quirk that indicated confusion, or, in this case, utter shock. "You're telling me," Kareth said, his deep, gravelly voice echoing in the lecture hall, "that your species avoids war not because of fear or strategy, but out of mercy?" Professor Eleanor Grant leaned against her podium, smiling faintly. The other students in the hall, a diverse mix of species from across the galaxy, shifted in their seats. They had heard this question before, though never with such incredulity. "That's correct," she replied, her voice calm yet firm. "Humanity has learned that war, while sometimes unavoidable, is a failure of empathy and understanding. We strive to resolve conflicts before they escalate, not because we lack the capacity to fight, but because we understand the cost of doing so." Kareth's mandibles twitched, his version of a skeptical frown. "But you have one of the most advanced military forces in the galaxy. The Coalition archives are clear about the battles you've won, the empires you've toppled. Mercy doesn't explain that." The room fell silent as Professor Grant straightened, her expression shifting to something more solemn. "You're right," she admitted. "Humanity's history is full of violence, much of it unnecessary. We've waged wars that devastated our own world, nearly destroying ourselves in the process. But it's precisely because of that history that we value mercy so deeply now." She gestured to a holographic display behind her, which flickered to life with images of Earth's past. Mushroom clouds rising over barren landscapes, ruined cities teeming with refugees, soldiers marching across endless battlefields. "We've learned," she continued, "that the greatest strength lies not in domination, but in restraint. We fight only when there is no other choice, and even then, our first instinct is to minimize harm, both to ourselves and to our enemies." Kareth tilted his head, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "But doesn't that make you vulnerable? If you're so unwilling to fight, what's to stop others from exploiting that?" A ripple of uneasy agreement spread through the room. Professor Grant anticipated the question. "It's a fair point," she said. "But let me ask you this. Do you know what happens when someone underestimates humanity's mercy?" Kareth hesitated, unsure if the question was rhetorical. When he didn't answer, Professor Grant continued. "They learn that mercy is not weakness," she said, her voice sharp now. "It's strength under control. We avoid war not because we're incapable of it, but because we've seen what happens when it's unleashed. And if someone forces our hand, they quickly realize that our restraint wasn't fear. It was a gift they squandered." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. A Zolothai student near the back raised a hand, their translucent skin glowing faintly. "But what about the Battle of Myrathor?" they asked. "Human forces annihilated an entire enemy fleet there. That doesn't sound like mercy." Grant sighed, the weight of history evident in her eyes. "Myrathor was a tragedy," she said softly. "The opposing fleet refused all attempts at negotiation. They attacked without warning, targeting civilian colonies. We had no choice but to respond decisively. But even then, our goal wasn't annihilation. It was to end the threat as quickly as possible, with the least amount of suffering." She paused, looking around the room. "You see, mercy doesn't mean passivity. It means exhausting every possible alternative before resorting to violence. And when violence becomes unavoidable, it means wielding it with precision, not recklessness." Kareth leaned back, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "So, you're saying that humanity fights not because it wants to, but because it must. And even then, it does so reluctantly." Grant nodded. "Exactly. We know what war costs on both sides. And if showing mercy means preventing even one unnecessary battle, it's a price we're willing to pay." For a moment, the room was quiet. Then Kareth spoke again, his tone softer this time. "I think I understand now," he said. "Mercy isn't weakness. It's having the strength to hold back when you could destroy everything." Grant smiled, her expression one of quiet pride. That's exactly right. And if more species adopted that mindset, perhaps this galaxy would know fewer wars and more peace. As the lecture ended, the students filed out, their minds racing with new perspectives. Karef lingered behind, his usual skepticism replaced with a newfound respect. "Professor Grant," he said, his voice low, "do you really think mercy can work in a galaxy like this?" She met his gaze, her eyes steady. "It's not easy," she admitted, "but if humanity can learn it after centuries of bloodshed, I believe anyone can." Karef nodded slowly, the seeds of a new understanding taking root. And as he left the hall, he couldn't help but wonder if the strength to choose mercy might one day change not just humanity, but the galaxy itself. Months after the lecture, K.A. Reth found himself reflecting on Professor Grant's words more often than he expected. Her perspective had challenged him, forcing him to question not only his understanding of humanity, but also the values of his own people. The K.A. Rethian military culture emphasized decisive action and dominance, viewing mercy as a sign of hesitation that could be exploited. Yet, he couldn't shake the professor's claim that restraint could be a form of strength. His opportunity to test this idea came unexpectedly. As part of an interstellar exchange program, K.A. Reth was assigned to a coalition diplomatic vessel on the outskirts of contested space. The region was rife with tension, with rival factions vying for control of resource-rich planets. The ship's mission was to mediate disputes, but the crew knew they were entering a potential war zone. K.A. Retha's first assignment was to assist in negotiations between two factions of the Vorak, a militaristic species known for their stubbornness. Each faction accused the other of sabotaging supply routes, and skirmishes had already broken out along the borders of their territories. As the coalition delegation convened with the Vorak leaders, K.A. Reth observed quietly, trying to understand the humans' approach. Captain Rachel Moreno, the delegation's leader, was calm and measured, even as the Vorak shouted accusations and threats. "Your grievances are clear," Moreno said after hours of heated debate. "But escalating this conflict will only hurt both sides. We propose a joint investigation into the sabotage, with neutral observers from the coalition to ensure transparency." One of the Vorak leaders, a towering figure named General Krov, sneered. "And if we refuse, what will the mighty humans do then? Threaten us with your mercy?" K.A. Reth braced himself, expecting Moreno to retaliate. Instead, she smiled, a quiet, disarming expression that seemed to catch the Vorak off guard. "No," she said simply. "If you refuse, we'll step back. But know this, every moment you spend fighting each other is a moment lost to rebuilding your people. We're offering you a chance to resolve this without further bloodshed. Whether you take it is up to you." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. K.A. Reth saw something shift in General Krov's expression, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even shame. Later, as the Vorak leaders deliberated in private, K.A. Reth approached Moreno. "Why didn't you push harder?" he asked. "You had the upper hand. You could have forced them to agree." Moreno regarded him thoughtfully. "And what would that accomplish?" "Forcing compliance breeds resentment. True peace comes from understanding and cooperation, not coercion." K.A. Reth frowned, struggling to reconcile her approach with his training. "But what if they don't agree? What if they go to war?" "Then we'll do what we must to protect the innocent," she said. "But if there's even a chance to avoid that outcome, isn't it worth trying?" K.A. Reth had no answer. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the end, the Vorak leaders accepted the coalition's proposal. The investigation revealed that the sabotage had been carried out by a rogue third party seeking to exploit the conflict, and the two factions agreed to a truce. For K.A. Reth, the experience was transformative. He saw firsthand how humanity's commitment to mercy and restraint could de-escalate even the most volatile situations. It wasn't always about overpowering an opponent. It was about finding solutions that benefited everyone. When he returned to his homeworld, K.A. Reth shared what he had learned. His ideas were met with skepticism, even ridicule. But he persisted, advocating for a more balanced approach to conflict. Slowly, his message began to resonate, particularly among the younger generation. Years later, Kareth stood on the bridge of a coalition flagship, serving as a liaison between his people and humanity. As the ship prepared for another mission of diplomacy, he thought back to Professor Grant and Captain Moreno, their lessons etched into his soul. Mercy, he realized, was not just a choice, it was a revolution, and it was one he was proud to carry forward. Decades passed, and Kareth's vision of mercy intertwined with strength began to ripple across the stars. His early teachings and collaborations with the Coalition were no longer whispered of as radical. They became a cornerstone of evolving interstellar diplomacy. Among his people, Kareth rose to prominence as an advocate for change, earning both admiration and resentment. Despite resistance, his message endured, gaining ground each time his strategies averted war or fostered lasting peace. Young Karethians, inspired by his journey, enlisted in programs promoting collaboration with the Coalition, eager to learn from humanity's methods and adapt them to their own culture. Kareth found himself drawn back to Earth, where it all began, for a pivotal moment in galactic history. The Coalition was hosting its largest summit yet, welcoming even former adversaries to the table. The Threxians, Vorik, and Zalathai, all once hostile to humanity, sat alongside their human counterparts, their dialogues free of the venom that had once defined their relationships. Kareth, now a seasoned diplomat, was invited to address the assembly. Standing at the podium, he looked out over the gathered representatives of countless species, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. "I stand here today," he began, his voice steady, "as someone who once doubted humanity's approach. I saw mercy as weakness, restraint as a failure of resolve. I believed strength was measured in conquest and power. But I was wrong." He paused, letting his words settle. "Humanity taught me that true strength lies in understanding when to fight and when to step back. They showed me that restraint is not born of fear, but of courage. The courage to build instead of destroy, to reach out instead of striking first." The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. "Mercy," he continued, "is not a gift freely given to enemies. It's a choice we make for ourselves, to rise above our base instincts and strive for something greater. It is not weakness. It is the foundation of unity, the first step toward a galaxy where conflict is not the rule, but the exception." The applause that followed was thunderous, a symphony of voices, appendages, and gestures unique to each species present. Yet Kareth knew the work was far from over. Peace was not a destination, but a journey, one that required constant vigilance and effort. After the summit, Kareth found himself walking alongside an aged Professor Grant. Her hair had turned silver, but her eyes still held the same spark of wisdom and determination he remembered from her lectures. "You've done well," she said, her voice warm. "Better than I could have imagined. I had a good teacher," Kareth replied, inclining his head respectfully. Grant chuckled. "Don't give me too much credit. You made the choice to embrace these ideas, to carry them back to your people. That took courage." They walked in silence for a moment, the distant hum of starships a constant reminder of the vast galaxy beyond. "Do you think we'll ever get there?" Kareth asked finally. "To a galaxy where mercy isn't questioned, where peace is the norm?" Grant's gaze turned skyward. "I think," she said slowly, "that as long as there are people like you asking that question and working toward the answer, we're already halfway there." Kareth smiled, the weight on his shoulders feeling a little lighter. The path ahead was long, but he no longer walked it alone. Together, humanity and its allies were shaping a future where mercy and strength coexisted, a future where the stars themselves would echo their unity. The room was silent as the alien student watched the holographic recording. It was footage from one of humanity's darkest moments, the aftermath of a battle during the last interstellar conflict. Ships lay in ruins, drifting lifelessly among the stars. Planets scarred by orbital bombardments rotated in eerie silence. Yet, what captured the students' attention wasn't the destruction, it was the humans. Despite the devastation, human rescue crews swarmed across the wreckage, pulling survivors from every faction. Enemy combatants, civilians, even the very aliens who had initiated the attack were given medical attention and shelter. The humans worked tirelessly, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The Carithian student, seated at the table with his peers, turned to Professor Eleanor Grant. His voice trembled with disbelief. Why would your people do this? They were your enemies. They would not have shown you the same mercy. Grant folded her hands on the table, her expression calm yet resolute. Because we learned long ago that survival at the cost of our humanity is no survival at all, she said. Mercy isn't about what others deserve. It's about who we choose to be. The student shook his head. But what of your strength? If you show mercy, do you not risk being seen as weak, as easy prey for those who would exploit it? A faint smile touched the professor's lips. Mercy and strength aren't opposites, she said. They're two sides of the same coin. True strength isn't in crushing your enemies. It's in refusing to let hatred dictate your actions. It's in finding ways to end conflicts without perpetuating cycles of destruction. The hologram shifted to another scene, a coalition assembly where human diplomats stood alongside their former enemies. The aftermath of the conflict had been grim, yet humanity had extended its hand, offering assistance, rebuilding shattered worlds, and fostering cooperation. Over time, the alliances that formed in those moments of mercy became the foundation of the coalition itself. But surely, the student pressed, there must have been those who exploited your mercy, who took advantage of your hesitation to act. Grant's gaze sharpened. There were, and when they did, we acted decisively. Mercy does not mean we are blind or naive. It means we give others the chance to choose peace. If they refuse, we do what is necessary to protect ourselves and others. But even then, our goal is not annihilation. It's resolution. The student leaned back, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always been taught that power was absolute, that dominance ensured survival. Yet, here was an example of a species that had mastered a balance he had never considered, the power to destroy tempered by the will to build. I find it hard to understand, he admitted, his voice quieter now. You have the means to conquer, yet you choose restraint. You could dominate the galaxy, but instead, you heal it. Why? Grant's expression softened. Because we've seen the cost of conquest. On Earth, we fought wars so devastating that our species nearly didn't survive. We learned that no victory is worth losing our humanity. Mercy is a choice, a hard one, but the only one that allows us to create a future worth living in. The student sat in silence, his 6 eyes flickering as he processed her words. Around the room, the other students, representatives from dozens of species, watched the exchange with a mix of awe and curiosity. Finally, the Carithian stood. I don't know if my people could ever adopt such a philosophy, he said, but I see now that it is not weakness. It is something else, something stronger. Grant nodded. It's not an easy path, she said, but it's one worth walking. And if even one person carries that idea forward, the galaxy is better for it. As the students filed out of the room, the Carithian lingered, staring at the hologram still flickering on the display. He didn't know if his people could embrace such a radical concept, but for the first time, he wondered if they should. The idea of strength through mercy was foreign to him, but it wasn't unthinkable. Perhaps, he thought, there was more to humanity's approach than he had ever understood. Perhaps mercy truly was the greatest strength of all.